In a bold, unexpected move, Canada and Qatar have signed a joint energy deal, one that completely bypasses the United States. No U.S. ports, no U.S. pipelines, no business for American refineries. This isn't just another trade agreement. It's a direct snub to Washington. And it's coming from two countries the U.S. once considered close allies. Let's be clear, Canada, America's neighbor and longtime partner, and Qatar, home to one of the largest U.S. military bases in the Middle East. These aren't adversaries, these are supposed to be friends. And yet, they've teamed up to build a brand new energy supply chain, one that completely shuts the U.S. out. The irony? This is happening under a president who promised to put America first and make the U.S. the world's energy superpower. But now, thanks to a series of tough tariffs and trade barriers, these allies are going their own way, and fast. And this deal isn't just about oil or gas. It's about power, global influence, and yes, even your gas prices, energy jobs, and the upcoming 2024 election. Because if the U.S. is losing control of energy trade, the ripple effects go far beyond the oil rigs. It hits Main Street, it hits Wall Street, and it could hit President Trump where it hurts most, in the voting booth. So how did America get here? Let's go back to where this all started. When a trade war meant to protect American industry ended up pushing its partners into each other's arms. When President Trump launched his tariff strategy, the message was simple. Protect American workers. Punish unfair trade. Put America first. It started with steel and aluminum, core materials for everything from cars to pipelines. The goal was to hit countries like China that were flooding global markets with cheap metals. But in the process, U.S. allies like Canada and Qatar got caught in the crossfire. Here's what happened. In 2025, Trump doubled down on his earlier tariffs, raising import taxes on steel and aluminum again, this time with even fewer exceptions. Canadian metal exports took a massive hit, even though Canada supplies much of the steel the U.S. uses to build its energy infrastructure. At the same time, Trump's administration introduced energy-specific trade levies, especially targeting LNG-related components. Qatar, the world's top exporter of liquefied natural gas, LNG, saw this as a direct threat to its economy and to its long-standing relationship with Washington. Now think about the math. Before tariffs, Canada exported over 3 million barrels per day of crude oil to the U.S. After tariffs, that dropped by nearly 18% as companies scrambled to find new partners. Qatar's LNG exports to the U.S.? Already low, but post-tariff, they're almost non-existent. For both countries, this wasn't just business, it was personal. Canada saw Washington turning from a partner into a punisher. Qatar saw itself being treated more like a rival than an ally. And so, behind closed doors, they started asking the same question. Why rely on the U.S. when we can rely on each other? That question led to something Washington didn't see coming, a deal that bypasses American markets altogether. One is a land of frozen forests and deep oil sands. The other is a sun-scorched desert peninsula with endless natural gas. Canada and Qatar couldn't be more different, but in the energy world, they're the perfect match. Their new deal is being called a game changer. It includes multi-billion-dollar investments in LNG terminals along Canada's Pacific coast, joint shipping routes through the Arctic and Suez, and new pipelines that move Canadian crude directly to global markets, without touching U.S. soil. Let's break it down. Qatar, with its massive LNG shipping fleet and global distribution network, will help Canada export natural gas to Asia at a scale never seen before. Canada, with its vast oil reserves in Alberta and British Columbia, gives Qatar a powerful energy partner outside the Middle East. Together, they're creating something Washington didn't think was possible. A full, self-contained energy supply chain that doesn't involve the United States at all. Imagine a map. Instead of oil heading south into Texas refineries, it's moving west toward Asia. Instead of LNG passing through U.S. ports, it's sailing east from Qatar, connecting to Canada's system through shared logistics. And instead of American companies in the middle, they're being left out entirely. The total value of this Canada-Qatar alliance? Over $40 billion in the next decade. And the timeline project's already underway. Some terminals could be operational in under 2 years. This isn't a long-term theory. It's a short-term reality. And it means the U.S. just lost its middleman position in a major part of global energy trade. But if you think this is just about business, think again. Because the ripple effects are already being felt, and not in boardrooms, but in American towns. Big deals like this usually make headlines in business papers, but the real impact? It hits regular people first. Let's start with jobs. Across the American Midwest and Gulf Coast, there are refinery towns that depend on Canadian crude. These refineries were built to process the thick, heavy oil from Canada's oil sands, not the light shale oil from Texas. Now, with Canada redirecting its exports toward Asia and the Middle East, some of these U.S. plants are at risk of shutting down. Take the example of Toledo, Ohio, or Port Arthur, Texas, areas where hundreds of workers rely on oil shipments that are now being rerouted. Early estimates suggest up to 12,000 jobs could be in danger if this trend continues. Next, gas prices. At first glance, you might think, the U.S. has plenty of oil, why worry? But it's not just about supply, it's about competition. With Canada and Qatar teaming up and selling to other countries, American buyers now have fewer suppliers to negotiate with. That means less leverage and potentially higher prices. In fact, analysts from Energy Tracker say we could see a 10 to 15% increase in gas prices over the next year. Not because there's less oil, but because there's less competition in the market. Then there's Wall Street. When news of the Canada-Qatar deal broke, shares of U.S. energy companies with exposure to Canadian supply chains dipped sharply. One major pipeline operator lost nearly $2.3 billion in market value in just 48 hours. Investors hate uncertainty, and this deal creates a lot of it. So while politicians argue on cable news, it's the refinery worker, the gas-buying commuter, and the 401k investor who's left holding the bag. But this goes beyond economics, because Canada and Qatar aren't just doing this for money. They're making a statement. This deal isn't just about oil and gas, it's about power. And not the kind that runs your lights. By cutting the U.S. out of the equation, Canada and Qatar are reshaping the global energy map and sending a clear message to Washington: we don't need you anymore. Let's look at Qatar's angle first. Qatar has always played a careful balancing game in the Middle East, keeping strong ties with the U.S. while also doing business with China, Europe, and sometimes even Iran. But after years of feeling caught between American demands and Gulf tensions, Qatar is now using this deal to pivot eastward. By partnering with Canada, Qatar strengthens its position as the top global supplier of LNG and gains a stable Western partner outside the Middle East. This allows Qatar to deepen trade ties with Asia and Europe, without relying on U.S. military or logistical support. Then there's Canada's motive. After the collapse of Keystone XL, repeated trade disputes, and Trump's tariffs, many Canadian leaders feel burned by the U.S. They've been looking for ways to diversify away from American dependence. This deal with Qatar gives them that chance, a way to sell to the world without asking Washington's permission. It's not just economic, it's political. Canada is repositioning itself as an independent energy player on the world stage, and the world is watching. China, always eager to weaken U.S. influence, has shown interest in joining the Canada-Qatar supply chain, especially if it leads to more stable yuan-based oil trade. Russia, facing sanctions and isolation, may see an opportunity to link its Arctic roots with this new alliance. It's like a new axis of energy is forming, Ottawa to Doha to Beijing, while the U.S. stands on the outside, watching old allies form new friendships. This is more than just a shift in supply chains. It's a shift in global power. And for Donald Trump, it's becoming a nightmare scenario. Donald Trump built much of his political brand on one big promise: America will be energy dominant again. He talked about it at rallies. He tweeted about it constantly. And in states like Pennsylvania, Texas, and Ohio, it won him votes. Lots of them. But this Canada-Qatar deal, it undermines the very core of that promise. Remember, these are energy states, where entire local economies revolve around oil, gas, and the supply chains connected to them. If refineries close, pipelines dry up, or export markets shrink, it's not just business that takes a hit. It's families, towns, and swing state votes. Take Texas, for example. It's the crown jewel of U.S. energy. But if Canadian oil is rerouted and global LNG buyers get locked into contracts with Qatar instead of American companies, Texas producers could lose billions in potential sales over the next decade. Same with Ohio and Pennsylvania, states Trump narrowly won in 2016 and again in 2024. If energy workers feel betrayed or laid off, those thin voting margins could vanish. This deal exposes what critics call the flaw in Trump's America First policy. By slapping tariffs on allies like Canada and treating partners like Qatar as afterthoughts, the U.S. pushed them into each other's arms. It's like trying to win a game by benching your best teammates. And here's the historical kicker. Back in the late 1970s, President Jimmy Carter faced an oil crisis that sent gas prices soaring and voters scrambling for change. That crisis helped Ronald Reagan crush him in the 1980 election. Now imagine this. Footage of Trump declaring total energy dominance, followed by headlines showing the U.S. being frozen out by its closest neighbors. The optics are devastating. It's not just about oil anymore, it's about credibility. And with 2028 on the horizon, this deal might be the one headline Trump can't control. Behind the headlines and official press releases, there's another story quietly unfolding, one that insiders in the energy world have been whispering about for years. We spoke to several analysts and executives, some off the record, others more direct, and their message was clear. This deal didn't come out of nowhere. Washington just wasn't listening. One senior official at a Canadian oil company put it bluntly. We warned policymakers in both countries years ago. Tariffs would force us to look elsewhere. It wasn't a threat, it was just math. Another LNG analyst shared this eye-opener. Qatar's been shopping for a long-term Western partner since 2018. The U.S. assumed it had that spot locked down, but arrogance has a price. There are even leaked strategy memos, reportedly from Canadian trade consultants, showing growing frustration as far back as 2021. They paint a picture of a country that felt cornered, facing U.S. tariffs, blocked pipelines, and growing pressure to stay in line, all while the global energy market evolved around them. And Qatar? A leaked diplomatic cable described as credible detailed Doha's growing impatience with U.S. demands around military cooperation, human rights, and trade terms. The Americans want loyalty without partnership, one Qatari official allegedly wrote. That's no longer acceptable. These aren't just complaints, they're red flags that were ignored. Energy economists say it was only a matter of time. Canada needed diversification. Qatar needed insulation from U.S. politics. Both saw a strategic fit in each other. And now, it's not just a deal, it's a quiet rebellion. For years, the warning signs were there, in trade data, boardroom meetings, even private emails. But Washington kept doubling down on tariffs and chest thumping, assuming everyone would fall in line. They didn't. Now, with the Canada-Qatar deal shaking up the energy world, the question is, can President Biden fix this mess? It's a tough spot. Biden's team inherited a complex web of tariffs and tensions, many put in place during Trump's presidency. Rolling back those tariffs sounds simple, but in politics, it's never that easy. If Biden tries to lift the tariffs too quickly, critics will say he's weak on trade or bending to foreign pressure. On the other hand, leaving tariffs in place risks pushing Canada and Qatar even closer, deepening their new alliance. And it's not just about economics. Qatar, for example, wants more than just the removal of tariffs. They're likely to demand security guarantees or military cooperation in exchange for revisiting the deal. That means Biden could get dragged into sensitive geopolitical commitments in the Middle East, complicating his agenda. Canada might push for multilateral agreements involving Europe and Asia to secure broader trade protections, moving further away from U.S.-centric energy markets. The worst-case scenario? Canada and Qatar invite major EU partners to join their energy bloc, creating a powerful coalition that sidelines the U.S. even more. This would leave the U.S. isolated at a time when global energy stability is critical. Biden's challenge is clear. He must balance domestic political pressure, global diplomacy, and economic realities, all while trying to keep the American energy sector competitive. Will he act decisively before the 2024 election? Or will this energy realignment define his presidency and America's future? So what does all this mean for you? This isn't just a story about oil or gas pipelines. It's about who controls the future of global power. And the U.S. just lost two of its closest energy allies. Energy today isn't just fuel. It's a currency of influence, jobs, and political power. With Canada and Qatar teaming up, bypassing the U.S., the stakes couldn't be higher. This deal could push gas prices up, cost American workers their jobs, and shake the 2024 election in ways few expected. Now, it's your turn to weigh in. Will the U.S. drop tariffs and try to repair these relationships? Or will it double down and risk losing more ground? What do you think this means for your wallet and for America's future? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit that like button And don't forget to subscribe. We're tracking this story closely and will bring you the latest updates as they unfold. Thanks for watching and stay tuned.